In today's show, we're going to discuss the capacity of women to judge. This is an interesting discussion and subject because in the Shulchan Aruch, it's three words. It says in Choshen Mishpat, we'll give it away. Choshen Mishpat, Siman Zion, Sif Dal says, Isha Psula Ladon, a woman is not allowed to judge. But in those three words, the background behind those three words, especially in this case where the Bavli, the Mishnah, and the Gemara, and the Talmud Bavli don't discuss this explicitly, and the Rishonim really developed the sugya from different questions, really from psukim and drushes like suvim and from other places, and there are many ramifications that develop from the different ways that the Rishonim learn it and the different answers they give to answer certain questions, and then the final product is a much more nuanced picture of a woman in din than the three words implied by the Shulchan Aruch, Isha Psul Ladon. Okay, so let's start with the way Tosfos in five places in Shas really sets up this discussion. And just before we start, I'm just going to mention that there's different parameters and different elements of this question. We're going to be discussing primarily the actual psak din, the koyach to be on a basin and a psak din. However, there are other elements under the rubric of srara, where it says Saim Tassim Lachamelach, and the Sifri is Derish Malach Lamalka. The Rambam says that it's problematic for women to have positions of authority under that framework of Srara. So Srara touches on a lot of things we'll talk about. Now we'll be focusing mainly on the Choshen Mishpat direct capacity for din, and not really on the Srara part. We'll mention it in passing as relevant. So let's start with Tosfos in five places in Shas in Gittin, Bava Kama, Shavuos, Yevamis, and Nida really develops this sugya, which is not mentioned in the Bavli explicitly, about whether a woman is possible. And he starts from Tosfos start from a very interesting starting point. The pasuk says at the beginning of Mishpatim, Eila Hamishpat, Ve'ela Mishpatim Shatasim Lefneim, right? Ve'ela, right? Ve'ela Mishpatim Shatasim Lefneim. So the Gemara has multiple drushes on that pasuk. So the Gemara in Gittin, Pechasim Beis, Reb Tarfon has two drushes from Lefneim. One of them, Reb Tarfon says Lefneim v'lo Lefnei Avdei Chavim. That Lefneim, Mishpatim Shatasim Lefneim, that Hashem is saying they have to place these Mishpatim before Jews and not non-Jews, which is the bucker for the Isser to go to non-Jewish court, which we discussed in a different shiur. And a second drasha, which the same brisa brings, is Devorah lefneihem v'lo lefnei hadyotos. That din has to be before mumchin and not before hadyotos. So, and this we'll discuss in a different shiur, how nowadays there are no mumchin, what things apply nowadays, what things can we judge nowadays. There's a concept called shlichusai. There's a concept where we're doing the shlichus of the mumchin who came before us. When do we say that? When do we not say that? That's a whole separate discussion. But Agaponim, we have these two drushes, Lefneim, meaning before the judges, before them, and not before Akum, before Avdei Chavim, and not before Hadyotos. Now, it's just interesting to note, Rashi and Tosfos have a little bit of machlokes about the explanation of this drush Lefneim, which has some relevance on the discussion. Not really, it's more about the other sugya of Akum and Hadyotos, where Rashi learns Lefneim is who's the hem, who's the Lefneim that we're talking about. So Rashi says it's referring to the Shivim Zekanim and Emuk Demuk B'Torah, even though that's mentioned later, it's referring to them. And Tosfos says that it's referring to judges, Elohim, really. The judges mentioned in Parshas Mishpatim, who are Mumchen. That's what Lefneim talks about. And then in regards to Dinei Kfi and other dinim, which are relevant for a different shiur, a different discussion, come out from the machlokes Rashi Tosfos. According to everyone, we're talking about people who are roy to be judges, mumchen. So they're Jewish and they are mumchen, not hadyotos. And now we're going to discuss male, female. Okay, so Tosfos brings up the point that there's a third drasha on Lefneim in Bava Kama. The price of Bava Kama says, Tanad Devorah Belazar, ve'ela mishpatim asher tasim Lefneim. Hishva kasav isha leisha l'chol dinish b'Torah. So asher tasim lefneim. The pashtus is that you should place before them, before the entire Klal Yisrael, men and women. So we see from that pasuk that the Torah equates men and women for all the dinim of the Torah. So in the Gemara over there, the Gemara also says other things, other dinim, einshim, and regards to if a shar and misa of a man and a woman, and the Gemara gives different makaras that equate man and woman for all those different things in the Torah. I might have thought for whatever reason, the Gemara goes and gives reasons and tzrichasa why I might have thought that it's men and not women. And if it only said one, I would not necessarily derive the other dinim from there. So, but the Gemara basically within that sugya, within that context of that sugya, the Gemara says that that all the mishpatim, all the mishpatim apply equally to men and women. So Taisus points out, Taisus in all these places point out that if you look at all these drashas together, there's a stira, because the first two drashas, is saying that they have to be proper judges, ones who are ksherim ladin. Then the second drasha, and we're excluding those who are not fit for judgment. The second drasha, which is hishva kasav isha leish l'chol dinim shebatera, is explicitly including women as well. And Taisa says that at first glance, women should be puzzle for din, not necessarily from a source in the Torah or a Svara, but from the Mishnah, it would imply for that whatever reason, women are puzzle for din, because the Mishnah says in Edom, in Tasman base, call hakasher ladin kasher lahoid. So the Mishnah says that whoever is kosher to judge is kosher to bear testimony, to be a witness. And Tosfos says that women, the vice versa is also true. Obviously, that if someone is puzzle for eidos, then we puzzle for din. And Tosfos says we have another mucker in Devorah Parakutes in the Parsha of Edom Zayimim. The Gemara we derive from the pasuk over there that men are kosher eidos and women are puzzle eidos. So the Gemara, the pasuk says over there, something along those lines. The Gemara, the pasuk in Devorah Yutes Yud Zayin, and the Gemara in the beginning of the fourth parak of Shavuos goes through a whole back and forth. There's different brises that the simple reading of the Torah Shabbat Ksav is that the pasuk is referring to the litigants. That that we're talking about the Balei Dinim, and the Gemara is derish that it's referring to the Edom as well, and we derive from the fact it says Anashim v'Leinashim, that women are passer for Leidus. So Tosfos says you put all these things together, we have three drashas. One of them Lefnayim, Lo Lefnei Avdi Chavim, and Hayetis, meaning you were talking about Lefnayim is referring to Kash Leidus. Number two, we say Hishva Kasav Isha Leish, that women are also part of Lefnayim. And the third point is that if you look at Amdu Shnei Anashim, the women are passer Leidus, and we have the Mishnah Anita says whoever's kasher ladon is kasher lahad, so whoever's passer lahad is passer ladon. So you put those three together, you have a stira. You have to halak, you have to know Teresh B'Ksav and the drush as well. But Tosfos does, and Tosfos says that you put all those three things together, you have a stira. Why? Because let's start backwards. Women are passer for eidos, and based on the Mishnah Anita, therefore they're passer for din as well. If that's the case, they're passer for din as well. So therefore, just as the lefneim is referring to people who are proper, who are able to be judges, and meaning mumchen, so too that puzzle of them should be memait women, and we find a different drasha which says that we're marbin women. Okay, so that is Tosfos' question. It's a little bit of a complicated question. Drawing on different drashas, you have to put everything together, but that's Tosfos and the Rishonim question. Okay, so Tosfos has two answers. Answer number one, Tosfos says, I'll tell you that women are kosher for din. And the klal in the Mishnah Nida is not to be read that kol hakosher, not to be read that kol hakosher ladin kosher lahad, as saying that whoever is pasal eidos is pasal to be a dayan, meaning as an absolute statement. Rather, the Mishnah Nida is supposed to be read that any man who is pasal eidos is pasal din. So whichever man is kosher ladin is kosher eidos. Meaning, it's not saying an absolute statement that whoever does not fit into the category of whoever fits into the category of din fits in the category of eidos, and vice versa. that whoever's pasal edus pasal din, talking within the category of men, meaning men who are, we're already talking about men and not women. And within that, we'll say, that this is a metric by which you could equate, figure out who's kasher ladin, who's kasher edus, whoever's pasal, whoever's kasher ladin is kasher edus. And it's coming to exclude all the people, all the men who, by virtue of being rishon or bring other things, have are puzzle for eidos, the puzzle for din as well. So it's not an absolute equation, because you have, let's say, a hedyot is kosher eidos. We're saying that it works one way, that whoever's kosher ladin is kosher eidos. If a woman would be kosher for din, then it will come out to be kosher eidos, which is not true. Okay, so the beer of this drasha, I saw a Mefarshim that explained that it's actually a little interesting, meaning that we're just saying that it's talking about men and not women. So the Mefarshim say that really you have two types of psuleidos. We find in the Rush in the end of the first paragraph, who makes a distinction. There's a special din over there called Eidah Shabbat L'Mksasa Batal Kula. The special din that, let's say you have a group of Eidim and there's a problem with part of the Eidos or Eidim, then Eidah Shabbat L'Mksasa Batal Kula, the whole Eidos is Batal. Fine. So the Rush quotes the Ravid over there and says that there are certain types of psula eidos, like eidos atzmai, where it's not like you're an aid, but you're a bad aid, you're a puzzle aid. In which case, nimso achmam karva puzzle will say eidos shabatim muksasa batal kula. Rather, you're not b'toras eidos whatsoever. You're so removed from it that you're not even considered a baragadas eidos. Meaning, there's three levels: someone who's a kasher aid, someone who's b'toras eidos, meaning it could be it's shayach eidos, but in this case, you're puzzle, or you have some sort of psul. Then you have something which is in B'teres Eidos Klal, and the example given over there is Eidos Atzmai. Someone on himself is not even B'teres Eidos, but a more clear example of that would be, let's say, a guy or something like that who's not B'teres Eidos whatsoever. So that is not enough to be paisel the Eidos. I mean, it has to have some sort of shachas in order to be paisel. If it's totally mufkat from the whole din of Eidos, so it's not paisel either. So these Mefarshim explain that the rationale behind the Tosfos explained that the Mishnah is saying kala kasher ladin is kasher lahod, is basically saying that within the framework of those who are ksherim for eidos, as opposed to women are mufka from eidos lagamri. It's not just like they're like a b'teres eidos and just pasal for eidos, but rather they're totally mufka from teres eidos, and therefore we'll talk within the category of eidim and say, okay, kala kasher ladin kasher lahod. Now, we find, just a parenthetical, we find something similar. We find Mishnayos and Kedushin, where it's talking about Tfisas Kedushin and who makes mamzer. The Gemara, the Mishnah has two categories. B'Torah, someone who's B'Torah's Gita Kedushin, meaning that, let's say, an erva, there's no Tfisas Kedushin. The Mishnah calls it, they don't have a Tfisas Kedushin in this instance, but in other cases, for other Jews, they do have Tfisas Kedushin, as opposed to a Evet Shevchaknan is a non-Jew, or Eidah B'Teres Kedushin Klal. They don't have Kedushin, not in this instance, and not in other cases either. So that distinction exists. So anyway, Nachamal. So we have the first answer of Tosfos. The first answer of Tosfos says that really a woman is kosher to be a judge, and therefore the drasha of Lefneim makes sense, because a woman is kosher to be a judge. You have a problem by the fact that a woman is possible for Eidos in Mishnah Nida. The Mishnah Nida is limited. So Tosfos, what Tosfos really just did is that they limited the scope of the Mishnah Nida. It's talking specifically about men, and we give a rationale that some Mefarshim, Rabbi Yaffe and others, explain that why Mehecha Tosfos to make such a distinction. Okay, that's Tosfos' first answer. Now Tosfos, the Ran, before the Ran. So Tosfos brings up the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi in a few different places, in Yuma and in Sanhedrin and in Shavuos, bring up this sugya. And they say explicitly, the Yerushalmi says explicitly in those places, it's slightly different gersos in the Yerushalmi in all those places, and the Mefarshim changed the gersos, but the basic gist of the sugya is like this. The sugya says, in all the places, let's say it's the one in Yuma. The one in Yuma says, it says about the Shnei Seirim of Yom Kippur, it says, Miyot Seirim Mishnayim, that the minimum number of Seirim is 2, and therefore, obviously, we have 2. So why does the pasuk need to say 2? To tell us that they should be equal. So that's the makar the Yerushalmi brings, that the 2 Seirim, 2 Seirim in Yom Kippur, Echad LaHashem, Echad LaAzazel, are supposed to be equal. And the Yerushalmi brings that for other dinim as well, a few other dinim. Then the Gemara asks from Eidos. So Rabbi Chagai, Hasav Rabbi Chagai Koimi Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Chagai asked before Rabbi Yossi, V'aksiv v'amdu shnei anashim u'miyat anashim shnayim. Right? It says v'amdu shnei anashim. Over here we're learning not Eidim, but we're learning the Balei Davar, which the Mishnah, the Gemara in Shavuos explains that the pasuk is referring to both. We're referring to the Balei Davar, the Balei Din, the litigants. And the Gemara, so Matal Madlaimar Shnayim, Shiu Shneim Shavim. So the Yerushalmi asks, based on the logic you said before in the past couple drushes, you would say that the Balei Din have to be Shavim, they have to be equal. But we say the Yerushalmi asks that we have psukim which say explicitly not the case of Aksiv, Loisat Mishma Gary V'Yasam. We have all these psukim saying don't pervert the justice of the ruling of when you're judging a ger and an orphan. So the Yerushalmi says we're clearly talking about where there are people of unequal background and stature who are having a court case together. Hare Matzinu, ger done and misha ena ger, b'yasam done misha ena yasam. Amanim bulas bal. So we see clearly that the two people who are having a din Torah don't have to be on the same stature. Right, of all these psukim, which explicitly say don't pervert the justice system and don't judge them favorably, unfavorably. Don't twist the truth. Don't twist justice in either direction. So the Yerushalmi continues and says that Shnei over here is necessary for Gzera Shava, and he learns out Gzera Shava to two places. It says you have Gzera Shava. It says by Eldad and Meidad. Midbar says Vishar Shnei Anashim b'Machana. And it says just as over there is Anashim v'Loy Nashim. So to over here, Anashim v'Loy Nashim. And it brings another similar Gzera Shava, another sheet, and the Yerushalmi brings another Gzera Shava from the same pasuk to Al Pi Shnayim Eidim, that just as over there is Anashim v'Loy Nashim, so to over here is Anashim v'Loy Nashim. Parenthetically, the Yerushalmi mentions Ketanim as well, but that opens up a whole different other sugya, because Ketanim have multiple reasons why they should be puzzle for Eidos. In Lamdas, besides for the actual limud from the Torah, Rashi and Baba Kama Peches also says it's Eidos Yat Yachal Azima because they're labaranshim. There's multiple reasons by Ketana, but Yerushalmi mentions that as well, just on the side. So then here's the key line in the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says, what's it called? The Yerushalmi says, Hare Lamadnu She'ena Isha Me'ida Me'ata Ena Isha Dana. So the Yerushalmi equates it to, we have a Mishnah Nida. The Mishnah Nida was up in there because you have two ways, a simple way of reading it and the way the first answer of Tesis read it. The Yerushalmi in three places clearly says that equates it to and says that this is a mucker for Eidos and for Din. So whatever the mucker of equating Eidos and Din that the Mishnah Nida is based off of, the Yerushalmi says is that is clearly referring to it as well. They're possible for Eidos and they're possible for Din. So the Re says that we go look at the Yerushalmi. The second answer of Tesis, b'shem the Re, that we go look at the Yerushalmi. The Bavli doesn't mention it. We go look at the Yerushalmi. That's one of the Kolei Hashas, Kolei Poskim. That when they're when you don't have machlekes, explicit machlekes, Bavli Yerushalmi, we try minimizing machlekes. So the Re says that really a woman is puzzled to be a dayan. So you have two oifanim how to explain the question of Tesis, because according to the first answer, everything worked out. Even though women are for puzzle for Eidos, we don't have a mucker, they're puzzle for Din. And therefore they're kosher for Din, and therefore the Lefneim, V'lei Lefnei Akum, and Adyotis, and Lefneim, Hishma, Kasel, Ish, Ish makes sense. The second answer of Tesis is really the puzzle for Din. So therefore, they're puzzle for Eidos, puzzle for Din, that makes sense. Then the problem is you have Lefneim, you have a stira, and Ve'elim, Meshpat, Meshatasim, Lefneim, you have a stira. So Tesis says, re-answers that the pasuk is referring to the klaus. Bain b'dayanim, bain b'nidayanim. It's referring to two separate things at once. It's referring to the dayanim, and within dayanim we have the miot of leilufnei adyotis v'leilufnei hakum. It's also talking about the people who are the nidayanim, and over there we say hishva kasav ish leish and hakad isa v'hakad isa. So the Re says that basically it almost says that the question wasn't really a question in the first place. That, and this is an interesting thing when you have multiple drushas, that Tosfos' question was really working all those drushes together, and the Re's answer is that we could have the drushes and we could explain them hakad isa v'hakad isa. So when we say ashtasim lifneim, really the Torah is saying, achaz dibur l'kim shtayim zu shamaiti, is really saying two things. It's saying lefneihem, before the dayanim, and dayanim will say lefneihem, whether Tosfos or Rashi of the Sanhedrin of Shivim or Elokim Tuva of Parsha, it's lefneihem, and therefore we're reminded Hadyotis and Nachrim. And lefneihem is also referring to the Balei Dinim, and over there it's a man can come to the court, a woman can come to court, and therefore Heshva Klasim Isha Ish. Okay, so that is Ree's answer. So the crux of Ree's answer is the question was Il Mishpat Mashatas Lefneim implies Lefneihem, and we're Darish everything about Lefneihem. And Ree's answering that there's two Lefneims. There's two. Lefneim is really referring to two. Lefneihem is referring to two thems, the judges and the people who are coming to court. So the Ran in Gittin actually has a slightly different answer, and he says. It's interesting. He says the Ran answers that. The Ran answers that really, Lefneihem is referring to judges, like we assumed originally, and it's referring to mumchim. It's not referring to the people who are coming to court. Rather, since and really from Lefneihem we're derish just those who are kosher to judge. So how do you deal with Hishva Kasad Ish Lish? Ron says that even though the Gemara says Elam Mishpatim Tasim Lefneim, it wasn't from Lefneim. You read the Gemara wrong. The Ron says that's where medayik from the fact that it doesn't say Dabra B'nai Yisrael. The Ron says if it's a Dabra B'nai Yisrael, it would imply Daf Gemet, which is an interesting thing, which you have to look in every place in the Torah says Dabra B'nai Yisrael. This gets very Torah Shabbat oriented. But the Ran says the fact that it changes Shani Akram Devorah, it doesn't say Dabra B'nai Yisrael, rather it says Elam Mishpatim Tasim Lefneim in a more inclusive egalitarian lashon, which refers to everyone. So that is the mucker of Hishva Kasad Isha Leish. So again, we have three answers. We have two answers in Din, and then in Bir HaKsuvim we have three answers. So answer number one in Din is Taisus saying they're kosher for Din. Number two, you have the Re who says they're kosher for Din and explains the Pesukah one way. The Ran says they're kosher for Din and explains the Pesukah a different way. Okay, so Ad Khan really the two answers to Taisus, but there's a raya, the main raya which Taisus brings up in all those places, all the Rishonim, the Rush, and others bring up, is from Devorah. And this is not just a raya, but the ramifications of how the Rishonim deal with Devorah will have ramifications, even according to Re, who says that woman is possible for Ladun, as we said in the beginning of Shir, the Shulchan Aruch passes, like Re says, Isha B'shul Ladun, right? It's pretty unequivocal. We're saying no, there are, based on how we answer the Nidin of Devorah, will have different pathways and different types of judging which a woman is able to do. Okay, so so this became a pretty interesting shir in the sense that it focuses a lot on the mamish what the Torah Shabbat is saying up to the Torah Shabbat. Okay, so the pasuk says in Shoftim Parak Dalad pasuk Dalad Udvaira Isha Nevia Eishas Lapidois he Shoftas Yisrael Beisahi. So the super reading the pasuk, she was a shofet and she was a judge. So the Ran in Gittin Taka says that l'chori could be meichiach that the Ran over there seems like he says yesh leichiach from Devorah, like the first answer of Taisus, that that a woman is kosher ladon. He seems convinced by that answer. However, in other places, Taisus and all the places Taisus gives different answers to explain away Devorah, and the Chedush Ran himself in Shavuos gives another answer. And as we said, the halacha is like the Re. Okay, so there are different answers explaining. So according to the first answer of Taisus, it makes a lot of sense. The pasuk is beautiful. The pasuk is right. Devorah is a woman. We see explicitly in Nach that a woman is kosher to be a dayan. She was a dayan, and she's kosher. The fact she's pasuk le'edos is irrelevant. However, according to the Re and the Yerushalmi, based on the Yerushalmi, this raises a question. You're telling me that women are pasul for din. You have a kral lahedya which says that women are kosher or kshera. Okay, so different answers given. So the interesting right after that, Chedush Ran in Shavuos says that shofetes is not talking about chaysh mishpat. It's talking about leading the nation. So shofet has two mashmosin. It could have shoftim like ilah shoftim v'shoitrim, right? We say in Devorah, which is referring to dayanim, and you have shoftim, sefer shoftim, where even though it's the Book of Judges, but it's the Ran is saying they're primarily leaders, and they led Bnei Yisrael. They were leaders of Bnei Yisrael, and they happen to be judges, but not judges in the halachic sense necessarily. and Devorah was not necessarily a judge in the halachic sense. Now, as we said before, this could get into issues of srara and different answers that we'll give for Devorah for how she would possibly be a judge according to the answer Taisus would apply to srara as well. As we'll explain. So, um, so that's one answer. So it's interesting also that answer itself shows that when you're learning dinim directly from Tanakh, it's confusing, and you have to be very careful because um, lashon Torah l'chud and lashon chacham l'chud, as we say all over, and therefore something that you just because the Tanakh calls it a certain thing doesn't necessarily mean that's what it means in halachic sense. So a shayfet, the Ran argues, is not to be confused with halachic dying. We find this also the Evan Ezer, the Beis Yosef at the beginning of Evan Ezer, he's talking about um, the halachic category of Kadesha, which is a halachic category, and distinction from Zaina, and he talks about the story of Yehuda and Tamar, and the Beis Yosef mentions that it's not necessarily a halachic category that we could derive from. There's a whole long Beis Yosef over there, but that idea comes up in the Beis Yosef that not necessarily can just because the Lashonis match up doesn't mean that the Inyan matches up. Okay, so that is the Chiddush Ran. So Taisus gives a few different answers, a few different places, and at first glance they look like the same answer, but they're not really the same answer. So Taisus writes, first Taisus writes that Shema lo'hosid dana aloisim melamedas lam dinim. And maybe she wasn't a judge, but she taught them dinim. Meaning she wasn't a judge, but she taught them halacha. She was a halacha teacher. Now the exact hagdara of what exactly that teaching was is important because, as we'll say, that these different answers of Taisus, a lot of are taken the halacha, and therefore a woman can teach hayra'ah, melamedas lan dinim in certain ways, and this is relevant in saying, in Israel, there's a whole thing going right now with the rabbinate and the Supreme Court about, women, smicha, etc. So this is all highly relevant. So Taisa says, okay, so that's answer number one. Answer number two, which some Mepharshim take really far. Some Mepharshim say that she was Begeder Hoira, and she could have been on the Sanhedrin, not B'Torah's, dealing with a specific court case, but B'Torah's Kaveh the Halacha, she would be able to do it, which is a very high level of psak. There's many different levels of psak. You're telling someone, you're writing Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is a very low level of psak. Being on the Sanhedrin Gedolah, being Machriya a case, is a much higher level of psak. And so the question is, where does this answer of Taisus fall? So some Mepharshim, there's a range within the Mepharshim, which would be relevant in Halacha. Okay. The next answer Taisus says is that, and this is the one Taisus writes in different ways. So Taisus, pay attention to the Lashonis. Shema kiblu oisa aleim mishum shchina. Maybe they accepted her upon them because of the shchina. Okay. That's Taisus in Gittin. Then in Taisus in Shavuos, Taisus writes, he says, Lefi shahaisin aviyah hay mekalim oisa aleim. Okay. Then Taisus in Yavama says, Al pia dibershani, and that's what Taisus Nida says as well. So the Mepharshim Ramadai can say there's really two answers over here. The first one, meaning at first glance you could read them and they all mention Ruach HaKodesh, they all mention Nevuah, they all mention Devorah, so maybe that they're all saying the same thing. What they're saying, we'll discuss in a second. But the Mepharshim really explained that there's really two separate answers over here, which in the Rishonim, some Rishonim say like one, some Rishonim say like the other. So Taisus in some places goes like one answer, and in other places like the other. That Kiblu Isa is the Iker. Meaning the first answer is that it was Ba'ifan Shal Kabbalah. That means that there's a din in Choshen Mishpat that even someone who's puzzle for din, if the Baalei Din are makabel that person on them for dinim mominus, it works. So therefore, Isha, Devorah was a woman. Nevertheless, because the fact she was a Navi was a secondary point. That was the reason why the makabel Isa. But the halachic relevance over here was less the fact that she's a Navi, that she was a Neviah, or Mishum Shechina. That was the reason. Oh, she is, a very holy person, and we therefore thereby accept upon her upon us as to judge our cases. But the parameters of that are clear, that it would only work for whatever cases that Kabbalah Psulim works, which is dinim ominus. Okay, so that's one answer of Taisus. Another answer of Taisus in the other places, which other Mepharshim say as well, that it was a Rasha al pia dibershani, right? That's clearly, it doesn't mention Kabbalah at all. So over there, so the answer where Taisus says al pia Kabbalah kiblu aleim, and then it also mentions Mishum Shechina, etc., Mishum Neviah. The Mishum Neviah is the second point. Mishum Shechina is the secondary point. The main point is Kibbul Alayim. And why were we Mikabel Alayim? Because of the fact that you're Neviah or Mishum Shechina. The other answers of Tezos say that that was a Rasha. Apia de Bershani, which Mepharshim explained was a Rasha. And that's what the Baragela in Chodesh Mishpah says as well. He just says the answer of a Rasha. Now it's interesting. I saw some Mepharshim explain that if you read the pasuk hints to those two answers. The pasuk says, "Devorah isha neviah, ish lapidas, he shavtas Yisrael be'esahi." So be'esahi implies a Rasha, and isha neviah implies less so, but it implies the first answer that she was neviah and therefore the makabel. Okay. Al those are the answers for Devorah. So let's go back now to the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says again, Chodesh Mishpat Siman Zayin Sif Daled. Very simple. So based on our knowledge now, so the Makar Hadvarim is primarily from the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says that we know step one, a woman is puzzle for Eidos, and the Yerushalmi equates Eidos to din. It says that that's to read the Mishnah in Nida. It's really the psul for Eidos, the Mishnah in Nida, and then Yerushalmi nems on the Mishnah in Nida in a specific way. Isha is psul ladan. However, the answers we gave for Devorah, even though we pass on like the Re, and not like the first answer of Taisus, nevertheless, there is relevance to the whole Shakavatariya and what we brought from Devorah. Why? Because of the three answers, in case you have Harasha, which is less relevant, but you have Kibbul Alayim, and you have Malamedas Dinim. And both of those, the Poskim say, are valid things. So a person could makabel a woman as a judge, in the Dinim Ominous, and the Pesach Tshuva brings that the other thing as well, that from the Birkei Yosef, from the Chidah, that a woman is able to be melamed dinim and hara as well. And it brings a raya from the Sefer Chinuch, because the Chinuch paskins like the Shulchan Aruch over here, like the Re, that an Isha is psul ladun. And then later on, when he's talking about the Isser to give hara when you're drunk, when you're under the influence, he mentions Isha Chachama as well. So it's clear that that he holds that even though a woman is puzzled for din in an absolute sense, nevertheless, she is kosher for hara, whatever the parameters of that are. And one last interesting thing, the Sma, this also just shows how learning the background is mayor the whole sugya, where the Sma quotes the Levush. He says, Ishab so ladan yafila me'edos I am prisha with the like Ir Shushan shakasav tam zar. He says the Ir Shushan, Levush, wrote a strange reason. So if you look at the back of the Shulchan Aruch, they quote the Levush, and the Levush mentions the psukim that Yerushalmi mentions, and the talk of the Tumim defends the Levush and says that if you look in the Yerushalmi, which Tosfos is based off of, brings these psukim, and he says it's not a tam zar, it's the tam zar is nasa zer zahav. Anyway, it just goes to show that a lot of times by digging a little deeper, we have a much clearer understanding, and other practical ramifications of this sugya come out as well.